So, a bit of context first, because context always matters. I'm what you could call an ex-supernatural stan. Since early 2018, long after I'd stopped keeping up with it, I've always been under the impression that Supernatural's done and gone already. And somehow, someway, I'm always proven wrong when I catch some stray tidbit of info on the show on the internet. It's never very important, and sometimes it doesn't even have anything to do with the show itself, but over the past few years, I've been vaguely aware of moments in time that remind me that yes, this show is still a thing. So, when I saw that Destiel was trending on Tumblr alongside an eclectic and odd amalgamation of tags that were just weird to see together, I thought that it somehow stumbled across one of those moments once again. Supernatural is one of those media creations that isn't too terribly relevant to the landscapes of works nowadays, but was a juggernaut at its prime, and influenced fan culture in ways that can't be discounted. As such, it's not uncommon to see it pop back up in the trending tabs for a short period of time when the show or show staff do something particularly noteworthy. And, that love confession sure was noteworthy. My supernatural phase hit me hard when I was a wee teen, and I had immersed myself within the show's lore and fandom and just anything and everything supernatural. The whole concept of the show wasn't the most interesting to me, but the potential the world gave was nigh limitless, and I enjoyed the main characters, so it was a perfect fit. I was never under any impression that the show was anything more than passable, if mediocre, after the 5th season, but it was fun to keep up with for the most part. Mostly because I could get into hour-long discussions about the world's lore and characters with people I knew that watched the show, and we could also rag on how ridiculously meme-worthy the plot had become. Alas, I fell out of keeping up with the show regularly sometime after the Leviathans turned out to be completely unworthy of the hype, and sometime before Kevin got his eyes melted out or something like that. That odd in-between stretch of me vaguely following along with the show was a weird one, because I was still very much active in the supernatural fandom as far as interacting with other people who still enjoyed and followed the show went, and it still brought me no small amount of joy to have that sort of relationship with the show. Sam, Dean, Cass, and a small handful of side characters upon occasion were enough for me as concepts to still enjoy casually watching the episodes and discussing the story presented with other fans of the show. And there were quite a few inspired moments here and there that reminded me that if nothing else, the cast and crew still had the presence and skill to make me feel for the characters I'd grown up loving, even if I had no such feelings for the actual plot presented. But like I said, at some point the meandering nature of Supernatural's plot, the utter lack of believable stakes, the roller coaster of poorly disguising itself as character development for, well, everyone, the retconning of previously established rules, the lack of any real forward momentum or examination of some of the show's best laid plot elements, all that eventually got to me in a way that not even our three main dudes' portrayal could combat. And I just stopped watching it. This also happened to coincide with me no longer seeing the three people in my life with whom I spoke the most about Supernatural with nearly as often. All in all, by the time Kevin was smited, I'd all but checked out, and at some point, Amara, I think that's her name, kissed Dean, and I found that I couldn't remember a single thing from that season, which was 11 maybe, other than that, and thus the show was dropped. Fast forward a few years, and oh, would you looky there. Destiel is confirmed, but haha, not really, as the gays actually must die. There's someone named Eileen who should probably be more relevant, but ultimately isn't, like every other female character in the show past. All of these people who were big important and big loved by the fandom are no longer present. This dude is the big bad numero 7000. Sam and Dean maybe kinda sorta not really addressed and worked on their fierce codependency issues and acknowledge their trauma from their confirmed and discussed as abusive pops, and now they can finally maybe lead healthy and safe lives. But psych, you thought wrong, because Dean is absolutely by no means not allowed to have a life that doesn't revolve around hunting and Sam, and his story ends in tragedy dressed up as closure and peace, and Sam raises his kid to be a hunter even though he's the one who always wanted to distance himself from that life. So why would he even consider doing that beyond teaching the kid some self-defense? And OMG, I hate it here. Imagine how tired we are. Supernatural fans who stuck it through deserve better. The cast deserve better, especially you, Misha, and every single female member. Destiel shippers deserve better. And I'm sorry that some of you actually expected better, when to be perfectly honest, these writers have been playing y'all something fierce. And it's Game of Thrones, Sherlock, and somewhat Endgame all over again. And the only ones that feel like they've come out of this winning is a bit of a minority from what I can tell, consisting of casual fans, those who were always only in it for the brother's tale, those who started treating the show as parody, and Wincest shippers, which is one way of looking at it. I'm just gonna let y'all have your little shindig and not touch that anymore. And this is what I've gotten just from watching the series finale episode and stalking the Tumblr, Twitter, and Reddit posts surrounding the previous 2 episodes. Yes, you heard me right. I have not watched a single Supernatural episode to completion since the end of season 11. I've caught bits and pieces of them here and there and seen a few screenshots and clips to remind me of my disinterest over the years. That Destiel thing took me by much surprise, and while I was endlessly curious, I only watched the scene in question and not the entirety of the episode. What I know about episode 19, I know from Tumblr and fan reactions. The only episode I've sat down to watch in its entirety is the finale. I understand that to many people this is going to severely lessen the merit with which you take my opinions as I review this episode, as both a contained piece and as a conclusion to a 15-season show. As well it should. There's an entire 4 seasons worth of context and development that supposedly led up to these last moments, and I'm unaware of the majority of it because the only energy I've devoted to filling those gaps in my knowledge is skimming through brief recaps. Still, this show meant a lot to me in my formative years of fandom and exploring fan culture. And one of the topics that me and my friends would endlessly exhaust was how we thought the show would/should end. And so it's with the energy of an exhausted gay, the snark of an overwhelmed student with decently relevant training to this type of thing, a full bottle of gin, and a tiny bit of nostalgia that I bring to you my analysis/review of this lovely send-off that the writers decided to gift us with to get us through the pit of despair that is 2020. Yay. Okay, firstly, I have never particularly cared for Supernatural soundtrack, and the beginning of this episode was a harsh reminder of that. Is this dog new? Sam is super not sweaty given the fact that he's on a run. Teach me your ways, oh non-porous one. Sir, how are you still this jacked? I'm feeling kind of attacked right now. The bunker has lasted this long into the show? This is super domestic, and I'm low-key here for it. This is cute. Things always escalate so fast in Supernatural, jeez. Okay, so I've rewatched the scene like a dozen times, and I'm still having trouble understanding how she didn't see this dude coming up behind Lyle. Like, he's tall enough and broad enough that she should have at least seen a glimpse, right? I guess you can argue that her sight is impeded, but the way the scene is framed makes it seem like she has a clear view of this doorway, and while this reveal works with this camera angle, it's inconsistent with where the woman is actually standing. She's on the steps. Like, what? There's no point to me picking this scene apart, but I noticed it and I felt the need to share. Okay, she does not look that scared, and sweetheart, it took you way too long to start screaming. Yo, how is it remotely possible that their dad's journal is still relevant to anything that they're doing? I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Sam and Dean have experienced far more than their father ever did at this point. Now, what if that was just a normal dude, huh? It's probably not, but still. Has there ever been a Supernatural episode that examines how trigger happy these guys can be sometimes? Like, an episode where they hurt someone that they're not supposed to hurt that picks apart the dubious and vigilante nature of being a hunter? Cause I can't remember at any point this time. Maybe there's one in the 4 seasons I've skipped. Are those shuriken? OMG, that's so extra, I love it. Sam's long-suffering look of absolute done is amazing, and I live for it, especially when Dean pouts in return. I feel like y'all shouldn't have just walked in here all willy-nilly like this. Both of your backs are to the door in several obscured places. It's dark and neither of you have flashlights? And then y'all idiots. You literally had the jump on them. You guys just stood there to be dramatic? Yo, why did you wait for Sam to shuffle up and kick you? Sam wasn't even moving that fast. Your reaction time sucks. That didn't take much. What was the point of making this someone we kinda sorta but not really know from the past if y'all were just gonna do her like that? I swear to God, man, the females can just not catch a break in this show. Ah, shit, why did they close up on that nail? Tell me that's not how Dean's gonna go out. They did it again. That's how Dean's gonna go out. I'll talk about this later. This transition of scenes is pretty lazy and a little bit jarring. I don't know, it just kind of feels like tacked on. And I still don't like the soundtrack. Dude, you get up at 8 a.m.? How do I get to that point in my life, man? I never get to sleep past 6:30 when I have obligations. Wow. They did Castiel so fucking dirty. I'm calling shenanigans. Carry On My Wayward Son is quite literally the only exception to my distaste for the music in the show. Who the hell is that? They didn't even try to make him look older here, but Jared's doing his best, so I guess I have to commend that. Is his kid a hunter too? Really, Sam? After all your angsting over the life and just... never mind. Okay, so that's better, but he still doesn't look that old. Maybe his body's just giving in a bit early, considering how much abuse he's put it through over the years. And that's sad to think about, so I'm gonna stop. I want to be more emotional about this than I am. Oh no. Oh, there's a message to the fans. Okay, that's super cute. I can't even be mad at them for this. Yo, what are Jared and Jensen gonna do after this? Like, I know that they occasionally do other things, but like, this is really it. Guys, the world is your oyster, you know, after certain complications, you know, open some more doors. Yeah, whatever. So this might be a supremely unpopular opinion, but I don't actually completely hate this episode. Like, now mind you, I certainly don't think it's very good, but I feel like it's met the quality of most Supernatural episodes for a while now. The main thing that's different about this episode, however, is that it is the series finale, and that changes things quite a bit. So, let's talk about that, shall we? I'll start by going in and giving my thoughts on this episode as a standalone Supernatural episode. Not taking into account any of the context of the season or the show over the years, this is fairly average fare for the first half at least. It has that odd kind of shifting tone to it that the show's Monster of the Week episodes have always kind of had. It's fairly innocuous, a little bit lighthearted, humorous on the surface, but kind of dark if you think about it too much, and can quite easily transition into something very bleak very fast. This balance of humor and intensity has always consistently been something that when Supernatural does well, they do it almost unmatched in my opinion. Not so much thanks to the writing or plot, but thanks to Jared and Jensen's portrayal of Sam and Dean. The moments of levity and charm work best when Sam and Dean are on the screen, because both characters have the context of being in the hunting life for so long and going through so much that very little phases them, and thus they can joke around in somewhat odd or inappropriate moments, and it doesn't feel too ham-fisted. For example, this exchange at the car with them picking their weapons is particularly striking to me because it feels so them. Like, this is how I've always known Sam and Dean to be, and it's communicated so well through the framing and the actors' efforts that I couldn't help but get a kick out of it. The first part of this episode plays out like your average case in Supernatural, post-season 5 at least. The actual monster of the week is mostly uninteresting considering it's not a tie-in to some bigger plot, and Sam and Dean are both seasoned enough that we know that they're going to find their target easily enough. The thing that makes it interesting is whatever the brothers are currently going through that complicates the process, be it them arguing over something, them being separated, one of them being dead, or some other factor that affects their ability to do their job. Honestly though, this case is super boring. It relies completely on the fact that this is, in fact, a season finale to keep the plot interesting. The audience wants to know what's going to happen with the bros. They want to know how the events that have led up to this case may potentially change how they go about doing it. Spoiler alert, it doesn't change it at all. I would not have been able to tell that the bros had just won against literal God and lost one of their closest friends in the process by how Sam and Dean act during the case in this episode. It's pretty lazy when you think about it. This whole case feels contrived to set up the scene for Dean's death, and the result of that is that there's no real stakes until you see this close-up shot of the nail. But instead of feeling like a holy shit, watch out Dean moment, it feels more like a really? Nah, there's no way moment. But yes way. The result is Dean being pierced and it not feeling good. Not in the sense that we hurt with Dean and for Dean, but more in the sense that this is objectively just not a good setup and payoff. It's like Dean had to die here, but we still needed another 20 minutes or so of the episode left after it. So we skipped a bunch of steps to get to this point and threw in a functionally random named character in hopes that the audience would go, oh hey, I remember her, and not notice that this all feels very poorly done. Like, how did Sam get taken down like this? My understanding from the earlier scenes is that they still take on hunts, so why does he seem like he's out of shape or something like that? Because he definitely doesn't look out of shape. Like, I just had so many questions about this part. And that sucks, because the lazy lead-up poisons Dean's subsequent death scene. I want it to be so emotional right here. On its own, this is a very touching and heavy scene we've got here. The callbacks to scenes and moments from years ago are great. Jared and Jensen really sell this performance. Dean's dialogue here is appropriately gut-wrenching. He's a world-weary man that doesn't want to die alone and wants to make sure that his little brother knows how much he cares for him, and to make sure that Sam's going to be okay. Sam saying that he doesn't want to do it alone is great. It really emphasizes that this is it, so why not put all the cards on the table? A single tear shed by Dean is great, and Jensen's whole performance of a man who doesn't want to die but knows it's on the way, regardless, is superb. Only thing about this scene that I don't particularly care for is the music score. I think this would have hit better in silence, or if the sad backtrack was a few clicks quieter. But other than that, on its own, this hits the mark for a Dean death scene in particular. Too bad that it's not on its own, huh? Too bad that this is the series finale, huh? Too bad we got a pitifully underdone setup for this moment, huh? Too bad it's the icing on a stale and oddly deformed cake, huh? We'll come back to this. Let's talk about the rest of the episode. Spoiler alert, it's boring. It's carried by Jared doing a great job of performing as Sam in mourning, and the brothers getting to see each other in heaven again is nice and all, but everything else is underwhelming. Jack changed heaven for the better, apparently, but we only get it exposited briefly by Bobby, who is nice to see and all, but still exhausting because here we get yet another retcon. Castiel is mentioned as being integral, but we don't get to see him, nor does Dean particularly seem to care to ask about him. Their family gets briefly mentioned, and that's nice and all, I guess, but this entire scene is just another setup to set context for what Dean is doing in heaven while Sam's living his life. There's a montage that plays of Sam's life, but the only thing substantial we learn from it is that he has a kid that he names after his brother, and that kid is probably a hunter too. You could derive that Sam's probably a better father to the kid than John Winchester was to him, but again, this is a montage, so it's underwhelming. Once again, this is set up for the final bro moment, only meant to tell us that Sam was able to live his life, which is what Dean wanted for him. This entire episode relies heavily on the viewer basically only caring about Sam and Dean. Everything else is an afterthought, which is fair, considering that they're the main characters and all. Except there's just a bunch of ham-fisted emotional moments thrown in here with lazy setup and non-committal follow-through. It is quite literally carried by Jared and Jensen's performances, which are the only reason I had any fun at all with this episode. And don't mistake me, I did have a bit of fun watching this episode, but not for the reasons that the writers and team probably wanted me to have fun. The opening scenes are pretty great. Dean's death scene is well performed, and the brothers reuniting in heaven is a relief. And I'm not gonna lie, it is a bit of a satisfying conclusion to their story. Any other enjoyment I had from this episode, however, I got it from laughing about how ridiculous I found things and thinking about all the memes I was going to be able to look at, roasting this show afterwards. Another thing to note was that my expectations were very low for this one. I haven't followed the show in years. I basically had no emotional attachment to this episode besides nostalgia and wanting to see how the bros story ended. And therefore I had nothing that I actually wanted from this. No plot points that I wanted to see addressed, no character conclusions that I was interested in. Except for Castiel. But I didn't trust the writers to give us that in the slightest bit, so I'd already expected that he wasn't going to appear. This wasn't a series finale for Dawn, the die-hard supernatural stan who'd invested time and emotional labor and energy into the series consistently up to this point. It was a series finale for Dawn, a human disaster with a soft spot for one of the forms of media that set the standard for tropes and stories that he would go on to like, as well as the occasional urge to check in with the fandom from time to time. Plainly put, I wanted to see how this show ended, even if I didn't particularly care how this show ended, and I was still disappointed somehow. I can't even imagine how the diehards are feeling right now. Because even with my low level of investment, there's a few things about this series finale that bother me. Number one being the framing of Dean's death. There's something tragically simple about the concept of Dean going out like this on just an innocuous hunt that should have proven to be relatively low risk. It could be seen as a rather harsh and cynical commentary on both hunter life and how it only invites an early death no matter the circumstances, as well as the idea that Dean is so deeply intertwined with hunter life that there was no other way for him to go out if not on a hunt. The latter is even said plainly in the episode. Dean very clearly says that he known that it was going to end like this for him. But that's borderline cruel. In the beginning of the episode, Dean says that they need to live their lives to the fullest to respect everyone else's sacrifices. So was he just saying that to make Sam feel better? This tragic sort of take on Dean's character could have worked, if not for the fact that everything that happens in this episode gives off the impression that if Sam wanted to leave the life after they'd beaten the big bad, then Dean would have agreed to do so with no hesitation. I don't know, maybe it's the choppy nature of the episode or the lack of context from the previous episodes, but something about the way things went down made it feel like Dean died for nothing. And that's not good. The hunter commentary is lost on the episode because Sam clearly continues to hunt after Dean's death, and it can be inferred that his son has a foot in the life as well. I think having Dean go out on a normal hunt like this could have worked at some point during the show's extensive lifetime. In fact, at one point, I would have told you that that would have been the absolute best ending for both of the brothers, but here and now, it just felt unsatisfying. Especially with his blatant lack of care for reconnecting with anyone he used to know in heaven. There's also something just a bit annoying about the fact that Dean says not to bring him back because things always go wrong for them afterwards. This is true, and the show's been occasionally very good at providing commentary on the brothers' codependency and screw the world if it's without you attitude, but the sheer frequency of death and rebirth for both the brothers and other characters in this universe takes away from all this. It really feels very obligatory, like Dean's death scene here and the scene where they reunite in heaven were written first, and everything else had to lead up to these two things no matter what they had to do to get there. Another thing that bothers me is Castiel. Now, I'm not a Dustiel shipper, and I've always been under the impression that Cass stuck around too long, and the writers had written themselves into multiple corners where they just couldn't figure out anything to do with him. All that being said, he was still one of my favorites to see on screen, and I felt like there was so much squandered potential with him. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the love confession and subsequent bury your gay moment. There is no way I can rationalize that moment in my head that doesn't feel insidious on the part of the writers. Like, you're not going to be able to convince me that they didn't throw that up in there to bring the shippers back to watch the final 3 episodes. You're not going to be able to convince me that Dustiel is not one of the most clear examples of queerbaiting there is. And you're not going to convince me that the writers didn't know how that would come off to the audience. The ship didn't have to become canon or anything, but honestly, guys, you didn't have to do the fandom like that. To me, the fact that Cass is barely mentioned and the fact that Dean barely reacts is more than enough to see what they were doing here, and it's really shitty. It also leaves a bad taste in my mouth to know that Supernatural apparently never got better at treating its female characters right. They definitely said you to this one. This is particularly egregious because they've had some standout female characters in the past, and at times it's really seemed like they've got something really great going with them, but then things just go south. To be frank, it all just feels like Supernatural got too big for its own good and ran too long for its own good, and to compensate, the writers resorted to tricks and shortcuts, and that's really sad. But such is capitalism. To the Supernatural fans that were hurt and disappointed by the conclusion to this series, I'm sorry you're dealing with that. The fandom kept this show alive and well for so long, y'all deserve better. There is a collection of y'all that I hope to reach with this, however. To those of you who are angry and hurt over the Dusty hell baiting, you're totally valid. To those of you who are hurt over Dean and Sam's positive relationships with other characters outside of each other being essentially ignored in this last episode, you're completely valid as well. However, some of you are pushing this narrative that the writers are pandering to Wincest shippers and or pushing that sort of interpretation. When your hurt feelings and disappointment abate a bit, I hope that you'll be able to take a step back and rethink that. I understand how one could come to that conclusion, of course. It's been more than obvious in the past that the writers and crew of Supernatural are aware of Wincest shippers, and it's been equally obvious that they have leaned into it upon occasion for a joke or some marketing ploy. Writers' intentions aside, however, painting the finale in this light diminishes and low-key attacks people who were low-key touched by the brothers' love for one another. They're siblings. They love each other, and it's okay to portray that. At the end of the day, the bros were the emotional crux of this show, and that's okay. This whole angry anti-Wincest take on the finale is something that erases and attempts to make perverse something that's perfectly normal and not all that uncommon in fiction media, in my opinion. That's something being men in media, being able to be emotionally vulnerable with other men in a platonic or familiar way. We've already come to the conclusion that this was poorly done, and that the writers may have had not so great intentions and or lack of care or / effort for the fans. But those of you who are reading this as canon Wincest and letting yourself get mad or offended or disgusted over it are doing just that. You're letting yourself get mad over an interpretation that you're choosing to have on these interactions, and you already have enough to be upset about. There's no reason to bring another thing down on yourself, in my opinion, when there is in fact precedent and clear enough characterization for you to not do that. Looking at this scene, it's not out of character, you guys. Dean and Sam have always been willing to be emotionally vulnerable with one another when it gets to peaks like this. And to the Wincest shippers, I don't particularly care that you ship them, they're not real. You can and will do you, and I'm sure the majority of you are great people or whatever, But there's a small minority of you guys that could definitely stand and handle this finale with a bit more grace. I'm nobody on the internet, and you'll do you as well. But from the perspective of someone who has no desire to judge y'all as deviants or weird or whatever, just because you want to see two fictional characters get together, some of you guys were being assholes about this episode, and it doesn't do your collective a huge favor. Fandom would be such a great, lovely, and productive place if y'all would stop picking at and attacking one another. So, maybe be a bit less obnoxious. Again, that's only to the small minority of people that are picking with people who are understandably disappointed with the way this ended. This is really the part where all of fandom should be uniting to produce fix-it fics and headcanons and lifting one another up. Like, come on, guys. Anyways, that's all I have. Was this series finale the worst Supernatural episode ever? No, I don't think so. I don't feel like my time was wasted watching it. It did get a few laughs out of me. Not all good laughs, mind you, but it did indeed make me laugh. And it did provide closure, which is what I find that I actually kind of wanted. You know, I feel like at any point in time, if Supernatural ended, I would have always come back to watch the series finale just to see how the bros ended up. Could have been done a bit better, though. Of that, I'm almost positive this could have been done better. But that's just me, my opinion, and what I've observed from the fandom over the past few weeks. Well, a week and a half as of the time of this recording. Anyways, yeah, well, that's it. Feel free to give your thoughts as well if you enjoyed the series finale. Tell me why. You know, if you hated it, absolutely hated it, wish nothing but fire and brimstone upon it, I probably know why, but tell me why anyway. And we will be seeing you all next time. And, yeah, that's it. Unpopular opinion, guys. Sam X Castiel is the superior ship.